I'm going to take you through the encounter between Viswanathan Anand and Anish Giri from the Shamkir Super Tournament. This game builds to a real climax, so watch out. Remember, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, then do click on the button below, very simple, and click on the bell for instant notifications for when we post a new video. Okay, on with the game. So this is a very classical opening, the Spanish. Two very classical players, Anand and Giri. They stick to kind of very orthodox strategy, you could say. But yeah, in a classy, classical way. So Anand prefers to keep the tension. Today he didn't go for the end game against the Berlin, so he's up for a fight, and that will suit Giri as well. Rook e8, standard move in these kind of positions, supporting the pawn and perhaps later on, discouraging white from playing d4, or if white plays d4, then e4 will be hit. a6, so this clears up the position of the bishop. Could drop back and then it'll be pushed away, but it's so interesting to see that Anand prefers to exchange bishop for knight. We see it so often in his games that he prefers the knight to the bishop, and that kind of bucks the modern trend. Knight c4 played, attacking the pawn here. Now, bishop g4 has been tested a lot in games between Karawan and Nakamura, and that's not bad. But knight d7 was played by Giri, defending the pawn. Yep, very sensible. That knight will have to move again at some point, but that's fine. Rook e1. Bishop drops all the way back to f8. That's fine, just tucked away. And given half a chance, I can imagine that Giri would like to clamp white's centre with c5. So Anand takes the chance to establish this very fine pawn centre. So, well, at first glance, looks very pleasant for white, but things aren't so clear actually. Giri, there are various moves here, but Giri just played a very simple move actually, knight b6, and this just clarifies the situation in the middle of the board. Anand exchanged on b6, so Giri has slightly compromised his pawn structure. There's a double pawn here, and yeah, these pawns are looking good. However, in this situation, this position, those bishops, although they're on their starting squares, I know the black square bishop has moved, but they have real freedom. And this centre, is this a strength or a weakness? Because if those pawns advance, then they create weaknesses around them. So d5. Well, that pawn would be isolated. I'm talking in general here. We wouldn't consider it in this position anyway. And if e5, then that would leave the d5 square available for a bishop, maybe a queen. So there's a real dynamic balance here. First of all, Vishy plays h3, so that is directed against the bishop coming to g4. Which would, apply more pressure to the centre. So that h3 looks good. b5, fine. Starts to use that double pawn and claims a few squares. Bishop f4 looks normal, and bishop e6. Rook e3, interesting move. It could be that Vishy later on will simply prepare to double on the e-file and support that pawn. And the rook, well, it can be useful protecting on the king side as well. So I think it's reasonable. f6, yeah, that's fine. Takes away squares from white's minor pieces and perhaps prepares just to dip back with the bishop and you never know, it might pop out on g6 or even h5 at some moment. So I don't think, in a sense, my assessment of the position has changed much. I think it's very balanced indeed. I mean, personally, I like the bishops here. I would feel comfortable with black's position, just kind of sitting back and waiting to see how white progresses, because it's really not easy to push those pawns. Here, Giri decided to put this rook into the middle, which is fine. I'm slightly surprised that he didn't play a5 and a4 and start to just kind of loosen up these pawns here. Now that would give white just pause for thought. Yeah, you have to think how you're going to deal with that. Do you want to push with a4? At some point, we'll see that there could be a weakness created on b3. So I quite like a5, but rook d8, very solid, coming to the middle. And queen f7 looks very reasonable too. So Giri has something else in mind. He's heading towards the kingside. Well, that means that Anand has to be a little bit careful about, with this pawn on h3 and knight on f3 are vulnerable. And now Anand makes a really interesting decision. He plays bishop c7, and now the rook has to choose which way it goes. If it goes this way, then let's say bishop here. And it's quite useful that the bishop covers d8. You never know, the queen might be able to switch over and perhaps advance, and then d5 could be coming. You never know. Or it could be just that the bishop would exchange here. Giri chooses rook d7. Now those rooks are split, which tactically is sometimes significant. I mean, it doesn't look like a big deal at the moment. And here Giri made a mistake. He played bishop b4 and he was very unhappy with this move after the game. It's possible just to play queen g6 here. Looking at bishop h3 potentially, looking through here. And who knows, maybe we would have seen a draw by repetition in this case. I think black is still absolutely fine, basically. But bishop b4, Giri had overlooked knight e1. Simple idea that the knight is going to come to d3, push the bishop out of the way, and then potentially the f-pawn can advance. That bishop on b6, which it looks slightly bizarre, actually does a very good job of controlling d8, but also protecting the d4 pawn. And because the rook on it is on e3, it doesn't seem to be such a big problem that these dark squares have been vacated by the bishop. Now, if the bishop takes the knight, let's have a look. I think this really is very pleasant for white. Again, that bishop is doing a very good job of running around those dark squares. White would love to advance the pawn to f5 and then perhaps push on, maybe get the g-pawn going. That's not a lot of fun for black. You'd like to counter with f5, but there are tactical problems here. There you go. That rook is undefended. What did I tell you? So that exchanging bishop for knight doesn't really solve black's problems. So Giri played bishop f7. Anand went knight d3. The bishop came to d6. And Anand, steady as ever, just nudged the rook over, connecting, protecting, and supporting the e-pawn. And actually, his judgment was correct. There's no enormous rush here. It's very hard now for black to hit out at this centre. What about bishop c7? Well, in general, you know, white wants to exchange that bishop, and here d5 is actually very strong. There are some nice ideas that sometimes white can simply sacrifice that pawn. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say here. So you give the pawn and now push on with e5. And these rooks are somewhat stymied behind this pawn. But it looks like white's pieces are going to be very powerful pushing through the e-file. Just one particular idea. So, you know, it shows what you can do with a potentially mobile pawn center. So in this position, white has just doubled rooks on the e-file. Bishop b8 by Giri, and now f4. This is a serious pawn storm. Very serious indeed. So if we manage to push to f5, then g4 could easily come, and you know, maybe e5. It's already looking very unpleasant. What a great job that bishop does of controlling dark squares on the queen side and protecting the pawn on d4. Very unusual maneuver from Anand. f5. Okay, what he's trying to do is get a square for his bishop here. So if e5, then bishop d5. Black is back in the game there. But no, knight e5 from Vichy. Bishop takes knight and pawn takes, and things are still going well for white, because if black tries to blockade on f5, let's have a quick look at that, with bishop e6, then we can take queen f2, and the problem is that it's basically impossible to stop g4 in any sensible way, and once g4 comes, then those four kingside pawns start to roll inevitably down the board, you know, f and e. Just compare black's 4 against 2 majority on the queen side going nowhere, with white's mobile pawns here supported by all the major pieces. Should be excellent for white. So Giri took on e4, but it's already a very difficult position. But he's looking for counterplay. Anand shuts that one down. Rooks are exchanged. Okay, so he's Anand has got rid of the intruder, and now it's time to advance g4 before black plays h5 to get at some kind of light squared blockade. And this was well played by Anand, because, you know, at first you'd think this is a little bit scary to allow black's queen round the back here, but actually there's no connection, for example, with the rook. That rook can't get into play, and white is actually, the white king is pretty safe on the dark squares. Let's have a quick look. h5, f5, here he goes. Well, let me give you an example. What happens if h4, just to control that square? Bishop comes back, so white is planning moves like e6 and queen g5. Okay, is it a problem if the queen switches over? Actually no, because that king just dances around the rook, and it's actually completely safe on d2. If the queen comes back the other way, it'll dance around here. Well, this is obviously too slow because queen g5 is coming. It's really interesting how well coordinated white's pieces are in the middle, and that gives white's king superb protection. So the game continuation, f5 played, queen h1. Giri is trying to create something here, but king g3, very cool move from Anand. And you can see these checking squares, they're all covered. They're all covered. So it's really hard for black to get anywhere, any kind of hit against the king. Rook e7. Bishop c5, the rook just had to go back, and e6, the pawn marches on. Well, it's possible to exchange and reconnect the queen here, but this endgame with the king supporting these pawns is absolutely hopeless for black. You can see that, the king coming in looks dreadful, and the rook perhaps invading on the h file. Okay, e6 just played, king h7, and now queen g5 was actually the final move of the game. Threat, queen h5 check, and queen takes rook. There's also a threat of bishop d4 as well to attack here. Well, let's just take it to a conclusion. Check. Yes, queen takes rook, but now it's white's turn at the other end of the board. We'll take with check. King comes out, and bishop d4. There's a cool move. White is targeting the g7 pawn, and if check, then king h5. The king is completely safe there. And then on the next turn, queen g6 and queen g7, for example. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing that black can do. Well, I think a really classy game by Viswanathan Anand. I think a standout maneuver was this bishop c7 actually. And yes, Giri made a mistake with bishop b4, but I think he was rather unsettled by this maneuver and, you know, felt that somehow things had gone a bit wrong, and well, he was thrown. Classy stuff from Vishy. I should say that Carlsen drew in the round stage, so he's still in the lead with 3.5. Karyakin and Anand on 3. Fantastic recovery from Vishy after losing in a very unfortunate manner to Magnus Carlsen. There's a free day tomorrow, but game battle will resume for round 6 on Saturday. Thanks for watching.